Hi, folks. Thanks for being with us today for our Safety and Health magazine webcast sponsored by HSI. We're going to give our audience just a moment to settle in today, and we'll be back with you shortly. Thank you. Once again, thanks for being here today, folks, for our Safety and Health magazine webcast. We're going to get started shortly. We're just going to let our audience give them just a minute to settle in. Thank you. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Safety and Health magazine webcast, How ESG is Transforming the Future of the EHS Professional, sponsored by HSI. This is Barry Bettino, an associate editor at Safety and Health and a co host of our On the Safe Side podcast. I'll be serving as your moderator for today's event. Before we get started, we have a few housekeeping items to share today. As a disclaimer, the views of today's speakers and organizations are their own and do not necessarily reflect those of the National Safety Council or Safety and Health magazine. Any mention of a commercial enterprise, product, or publication does not mean the Council or the magazine endorses those items. After today's presentation, we will conduct a question and answer session with our speakers. If you have a question today, click the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, type in your question, and press the send button. We welcome your questions at any time during today's event. This is also a very interactive presentation today. Our speakers welcome your feedback via the chat function, which is open for our attendees today. But just a reminder, for any questions, use the Q&A button. For any feedback for our speakers today, please use the chat function. Also, after this presentation, you'll be asked to complete a brief evaluation survey, but I'll tell you more about that a little bit later. This webcast will be archived so you can access it after today's live event. To view this webcast and all of our past webcasts, please visit safetyandhealthmagazine.com/events, or you'll also receive a link in our post-event email. With that, let's introduce our presenters. With us today are Jill James and Dr. Todd Lusheen. Jill is the Chief Safety Officer at HSI, focusing on products, thought leadership, and regulatory trends. Her 29-year EHS career includes 12 years as an OSHA Senior Safety Investigator and several years in healthcare, education, biotech, life sciences, and the poultry industry. Jill has hosted the Accidental Safety Pro podcast for 5 years. She received her master's in industrial safety from the University of Minnesota Duluth. Todd is an award winning professor at the University of Wisconsin Whitewater and has been practicing safety for more than 29 years. Todd started as a compliance officer with Minnesota OSHA, and he worked with the Department of Health and Family Services while attending graduate school at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Todd is also active with the American Society of Safety Professionals, and he serves as Vice President of Region 5. Again, we thank you all for tuning into this presentation. And Jill, whenever you're ready, please take it away.
All right. Thank you so much, Barry. Appreciate that introduction. And thank you all for joining us today. Really appreciate you being here and spending your time with us. What's not covered in our bios is that Todd, Dr. Lusheen, and I have been professional friends and real friends for nearly 30 years. We started our EHS careers together as investigators with OSHA. You heard that in the bios. Yes, we were there at the same time. And over these 30 years, we've found ways to continually collaborate regardless of where either of us is working after all these years. This particular topic that we are covering with you all today, we presented pieces of it at ASSP's National Conference this summer in San Antonio. Wondering if any of you were there, you'll have to let us know, or if any of you attended our session at that time, you can put that in the chat if you'd like to. So for our topics today, our agenda that you can see on the screen, we're going to work to define ESG, environmental social governance, or sustainability, as many people also call it. and the efforts that we're going to talk about why it matters, to whom it matters, and in terms of whom it matters in your organization, perhaps to your leadership, to your workforce, or to your community. Todd, what else are we going to talk about?
Well, let's also talk about, I guess what would be the 300-pound gorilla in the room is that ESG has been given some negative publicity. Some of it deserved, but what I really want to let everybody know is that we are not experts. We're not going to give you the magic recipe to develop your company's ESG, but rather we want to talk about it first from sort of what are the benefits of pursuing something like this, and then from the safety professional's role, what can we do to contribute to it? And so this isn't a check these boxes and thou is now given an ESG program that is functioning, but rather it's something to consider in your approach to safety, environmental health, and on up throughout the organizational's culture. That's about all I want to say for now.
That's perfect. All right. So Barry had mentioned that we'd like this to be an interactive session today. And so we would really invite you to use the chat function as often as you'd like. So to get us started, we'd like to know, why did you choose this session in particular? And what do you hope to gain today, to see if we can hopefully cover some of those items for you? Short of what Todd just said, there isn't a roadmap, a checklist that we're going to, say, if you do this, this, and this, it's all complete, because as we know, there aren't a lot of guardrails right now for ESG. And if you don't know that, we'll be talking about that today. So go ahead, enter in the chat if you would. What brought you here? What do you hope to learn? Oh, what does this look like to other organizations? Thank you. That's really great. We did learn some of that when we were in San Antonio. So we can share that with you for sure. Gaining information, Todd. Better knowledge. Hear about others' experiences. It's a hot topic and you want to learn how to incorporate it. Okay, we'll be talking about that. How it applies. All right. Oh, state organizations. Okay. Yeah, what other companies are doing. Global responsibility. All right. Yeah, anything you want to react to with that, Todd?
Yeah, I am looking at all of them, and I saw one from Shirley Parsons post on here, and it's interesting. I was on LinkedIn before we turned on the recorder, and I did see some positions posted. And to be honest, it wasn't really specific on what is needed, and I do think this is new enough that it still is going to go through several iterations or evolutions before we finally result on what it's really like. And I've spoken to people who actually have this role, and their opinions are not concisely the same on every aspect of it. And again, we are kind of discovering it as we go through, and it was significantly hampered because of the pandemic that really slowed things down, but now it's getting some energy again. But again, we're if I'm speaking from the US perspective, and I don't want this discussion to go down this road, but things are very politically heated right now, and unfortunately it is part of that whole lexicon. So we'll try to sidestep that, but in essence what we want to do, and I hope this is what everybody kind of gets out of this, is what can we do in our everyday job as EHS professionals that would that would collect the data, that would help contribute to the assignment of metrics and goals within the company, that would move towards what the ESG community deems as a higher functioning ESG program. I think that's the best we could do.
Sure. Yeah, and someone else is asking, is this an HR or EHS responsibility? Good question. We'll be talking about collaboration as we go along. And let's see what else. Someone else had something I thought was interesting in here. that it's new to their organization. Yeah. Okay. So I think let's move on in defining what it is. Thank you all so much for contributing. Really appreciate that. Yeah. So environmental social governance, just in case no one's familiar with what the vernacular means. And then Todd, go ahead. What else? What else? Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So yeah, when
Yeah.
Jill initially approached me and had said, "Hey, I'm interested in this topic. What do you know about it?" I initially thought she said MSG, and I'm like, "Why are you talking about food additives?" So it's not MSG. It's
Really
I bet
bad
it
dad
completely
joke.
landed
Yeah.
bad. Okay,
Yeah.
great.
Okay.
But really, what Jill and I are trying to get at with this is that it's strategic thinking. Some of you, if you're, here's the thing, earlier in your career, when you practice in this field, it tends to be very much toward the where the rubber hits the road. You're out on the floor talking to people, doing observations, things like that. But as you become more experienced, it's like you move away from the floor and you're doing more of the corporate reporting. You're spending more time in meetings and presentations, providing data, and that's where this really comes in. That you're thinking of safety not from a purely injury prevention perspective, but how can the effort we're putting into the protection of workers gain us greater access to people to hire or be attractive to people who want to invest. And same with environmental, same with how the company is run. We want to be able to meet the demands of the company, and we feel that by being responsible in more ways than just the profit maker, that will gain us those extra things that we need to be successful. And I mean, and speaking from experience, it's really difficult to find talent right now because unemployment's really, really low. And I know, because I spend every day pretty much with younger folks at the college level, that the interest is to be social responsible, being very aware of the global climate, of societal discrepancies in pay and resources. And so they are looking for those types of things when they apply. Not all levels, but if we want to make sure that we always have access to talent and to attract talent and to attract people who are interested in what we do and support us, it's good to also show that you care more than just narrowly this company is going to profit. So go ahead, Jill.
Yeah, so when we put this slide together for you, we wanted to use it as a way to define what might be in each of those buckets of E, S, and G. By no means is this a comprehensive, but we wanted to give some ideas of what things might land in those, and then thinking about what are the different people in an organization that might already have responsibilities over some of these topic areas on the screen. And if we want to think about this in just a little bit of a different lens, if that helps you, if you think about corporate risk as a whole, all of us are, we deal with risk in our EHS professions all the time. But if you look at your entire organization and think about corporate risk and think about maybe your CFO, your CTO, your CEO, your HR person, and you as a professional and other professionals in your organization, what keeps them awake at night? What are the corporate risks that they're concerned about? That might be another lens that you can look at and think about it as you look at kind of these buckets that, again, aren't inclusive, but we wanted to give you an idea of what are those topical areas that might be in them. And so in the chat now, we're wondering if you could fill in for us, what things, as you're looking at this slide, what things do you have responsibilities for already in your role today, as it sits today? Not making up something new, but what do you have responsibility over? Because we know that as EHS professionals, some of us have really broad responsibilities in our jobs. Some of us have more narrow. And then what are we missing that might fit into some of those other buckets as we're all trying to learn together on this webinar? So you can go ahead. And Laura is saying she has a lot of responsibility in environmental. Yeah. Gary says primarily health and safety. Okay. OSHA compliance specifically for Clifford. Okay, great. Yeah. Yeah.
And you'll see, Jill, that I also replied to Sergio, who is asking some really good questions. That yes, in some in some podcasts, they've actually discussed about ESG being detrimental to a company, that it's pulling away from profitability. But the thing is that's a very almost narrow view of it. That what we're presenting it as, or the way we're talking about it, is expanding. It's about caring for more than one thing. And I'm sorry, I mean, anybody who's practiced in this field for a while knows that sure, you can narrowly solve a problem, but then actually create additional issues down the road, or you can look at a problem more broadly. And
Yeah,
in which case, go ahead, Jill. Go ahead.
no, I'm just saying I'm really loving everything that everyone's contributing, and it leads to the fact of how diverse our jobs are. And depending on where we're working at any point in time, we all have different responsibilities. Many of you have many of you have environmental responsibility, community relations, and business ethics. That's interesting. Okay, carbon footprint, toxic waste. Yeah, very good. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I hope that's helping some of you just even understand, under those responsibilities, then where would they fit in each of those buckets and where you might have influence. Yeah. Thank you for that. So let's move on to our next piece. So some of you may be wondering, I know that someone here is a professor at a college and trying to figure out, how do I put this into my curriculum? So is this a new topic? Is it like something that's ripped from the headlines, or is it kind of old? And so it's not really a new concept at all. There have been drivers for this movement from back in 2006, when the United Nations brought this up for the first time, and it's been building momentum ever since. So while it's also been more of a focus for really big brand name companies for a while, it's picking up steam across all types of employers and all company sizes. So on the screen right now, you'll see brands that you recognize. And the images that are on the screen are from ESG and sustainability landing pages from their corporate website. So again, some companies call the initiatives under this category sustainability and have been at this for a very, very long time. Others are calling it ESG. And some people are using it in sustainability in place of ESG. So if you want to, can invite you to bring up Google right now, if you'd like to, or whatever your search engine is, and type in your favorite brand name or even your own company brand name right now, and the search term ESG or sustainability, and see what you find. We have, many companies have landing pages that explain, what they're doing. And what you'll find when you start digging into these, that everyone has different priorities, because that's what ESG and sustainability is trying to figure out, as I said a moment ago, what are your corporate risks and what are the things that you want to impact from a corporate risk perspective, and then what do you want to share with the greater world. So that might mean sharing with your community, sharing with your employees, sharing with your investors, sharing with prospective employees, is what people are putting on these landing pages. So what are you finding? Yeah. Wonderful. Yeah, thanks for contributing. Appreciate that. Yeah, so Todd, tell us, are there any rules around this?
Currently, I mean, you'll not specifically. I mean, there is an ISO standard. We know that's not required, right? So there are no real, thou must do these things. But as we all know, all of us have been practicing for almost 3 decades now, that sometimes when things are discussed as good ideas, they become a requirement later on as we gain more experience and understanding of how it benefits this, the greater good. And I think, so what Jill and I had talked about is that probably because we see things on an international scale, and then somehow, it transforms or falls into our, US operations. And so at this point in time, no, there isn't a specific ESG regulation, though we can find other forms of regulations within those elements themselves. So if there are things we're already doing, so why go after this if there's things we already have to do? Because it's attempting to look at it from a bigger picture is what it is. It's saying, how are we attempting to attain um, something greater than just here's the safety program, here's the environmental management program, this is how the corporation is being run, this is what we value, this is our organizational culture. It's meant to try to show that there is some integration, there is some commonality, and that what we're doing is we're basically bragging that these things are really important to us, and we want other people to join us on this journey, um, to pursue these bigger things, that it's not just compliance here, compliance there, compliance there. We're getting it, I'm going to use a term that Jill loves to use, and we're getting ahead of the curve.
Yeah. So someone had asked earlier about state regulations and state and specific things. So are there states and are there local regulations like city and county regulations that are being developed around this? Yeah, there are. Can we give you a list of them right now? Absolutely not. We don't have a list of all of those. However, that's something that you'll want to pay attention to. What we are seeing is a trend that's more specific toward environmental things, carbon footprint things, maybe recycling programs. It can span this distance. And so if you have operations in specific states, you might want to do, does New Hampshire have ESG requirements, or does this community, this city, this county where we're doing business have any ESG requirements? So that you'll be able to set up corporate benchmarking as the slide is indicating. Yeah. Yeah, so to whom does ESG matter? And so for this particular slide, Todd and I wanted to just break down to be able to do some storytelling around, thinking what do these three buckets, to whom do they matter? So if we start with thinking about if you're a customer or a consumer, does anything under the ESG flags matter to you? So if you think about the brands that you're loyal to, just so if everybody kind of puts on their personal spending brand, you're going to whatever retailer, you're going to order something from somewhere, you're going to be brand loyal to whatever. What are the reasons that you are loyal? Or are there brands that you say, absolutely not? I don't shop there. I don't spend my money there. I don't invest with that organization if you're an investor. And then what are the reasons for that? So if you want to chime in about if you have particular thoughts on that, you do spend somewhere, you don't spend somewhere, you don't have to say why, unless of course you want to, but are you loyal to certain places or not to others? I know that I certainly am. Todd, you probably are too. There's some places I don't spend my personal money because of something here. Maybe it's a labor practice. Maybe it's a labor practice. Yeah, clothing companies, Jasmine is saying. Yeah, right.
And I mean,
Yeah.
as a professor and speaking, we had a couple people on here asking about that, although I'm not speaking directly to ESG, that there are certain companies that when they offer like an entry level position to, that my students could apply for, I steer my students away from it because I know kind of the corporate culture that goes on there, because it's a revolving door. Why don't people stay there? Well, it doesn't take long to figure out, yeah. 3 is a trend. And so it's something similar to that. Yeah. If I was to, and I think millennials and Gen Z, they're going to be more keen on this, that it's not just, is a job available? It's how do they support me? Because that's what they're used to. That's what they've been given now, middle school, high school, college. And that's, again, I think that's the way that's going. Okay, I just want a quick tangent here, and this may be a question for Barry. I was trying to submit something from Valerie Mikna to the question and answer. She has a really good question as to HR or safety questions. Will a team effort with data and metrics being collected by multiple parties who ultimately submits the reports is a different matter? Right. So I think that's a great question. And I think it comes down to you. If anybody's been through accreditation before, you decide. You kind of set it up based on this is a customized thing. This isn't a generalized thing. And And I think that, yeah, safety, HR, environmental people, corporate people, operations, this is an all-in thing. They all contribute to it. Who submits it? You decide. You decide who's going to submit it.
Yeah. So moving on with our slide to whom does ESG matter or corporate risk matter? So if we move into, if you're an employee at a company, what matters to you? What matters to you in that regard? Christy, if you want to back up a slide, that would be great. Thank you. And so Todd mentioned employees who might be vetting a company. I've got a Gen Zer who's looking for a job, looking for internships right now. What pages is he going to? He's going to the ESG page. And then he, in the interview, asks, you say that this is true about your company. I'm a prospective engineer. Tell me about that. Tell me more about that. So consumer-wise, people who are looking for jobs are looking at that. Communities, if they're looking to bring a business into a community, they want to make sure that that community aligns, or that business rather aligns with community values, or they're not going to be someone that ends up, shining some sort of negative light on the community. And if you're a contractor, some of you are already chiming in about being contractors, or if you're hiring contractors, you want to make sure that you're not having someone who's, dumping toxic waste in the river behind your business when they're doing work at your facility. That's an extreme example. But, if you're a contractor hiring contractors, same thing. And of course, with investing. So those of us who are investors, we want to make sure that we're investing with companies that align with our particular value systems as well. So Todd, is there anything to that slide that you wanted to add before we move on?
No, I just want to thank everybody who's contributing to the chat. I'm sorry, I'm kind of paying attention to Jill, but I'm reading the chat too.
Thanks,
I'm
Todd.
just kidding. I am totally kidding. I'm kidding. But yeah, let's go to the next one.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, so on this next slide, so Todd mentioned earlier that we don't have any hard and fast rules. There aren't any regulations. So many of us are paying attention to the SEC right now, SEC, looking, because they keep saying, oh, we're going to put out some rules around this. We're going to put out some regulation around this. And, it's not happening. It's not happening. It's not happening. And so the question might be, well, is anybody getting in trouble? And I'm using air quotes for not doing things that might end up in any of those 3 E, S, and G buckets. Well, yeah, of course. I mean, you can see some examples on the screen right now. The one in the upper right-hand corner is a company in my state. I happen to be from Minnesota, and that particular employer has been having problems with what they're putting into the groundwater, and how they've been exposing their employees to lead for a very, very long time, and some other chemicals, and it's stretched into the community. It's stretched into homes now. And I thought they were having things kind of getting taken care of, and then just on my news in the last week, they're back in the news again. And communities are saying this business, the people who live around this facility are saying this business needs to close down. So can there be impacts, and do people care, who might be homeowners, who might be employees, to things that employers are doing? And of course, that one specifically is around environmental. And so is it making a difference to companies, how they operate, their profitability, whether they're sustainable or not? Yeah, it absolutely does, even though there isn't a hard and fast law in the United States right now, though Europe has definitely some things that are more stringent than what we have in the US. Anything you wanted to add there, Todd? Oh yeah, should we move on?
Yeah, let's keep moving. Yeah.
Yeah. So what's happening in your organization? We're curious to know, do you have work groups who are working on ESG? Are you part of the conversation? Are you leading the conversation? Are your executives driving this, which is more common than not to have executive teams leading this particular thing? When Todd and I did this presentation in San Antonio, we got to hear a lot of different things that people are doing. So one example I can think of is an organization, an employer in the semiconductor industry said, we're not working on ESG initiatives as one independent company. We reached into other semiconductor industries, others like us in our organization, and we're working on this as a group. So as a larger organization together, and then we're all going to do things together. So that was one example. Todd, can you think of some others that people shared with us in San Antonio?
I mean, we had a lot of people. I think we'll kind of break this down real quick. And I think the most common question we received, or I should say feedback received, is I wanted to know, I was hoping to come and learn how to build this. And what we basically said is there are things you're already doing. There are elements already in place. And one thing that I related to is when Jill and I began this journey, I looked at some companies, some competitors to this company I've been helping out all year, and I went to the head of operations and shared that, hey, this isn't something you have. Would you be interested in pursuing this? And the basic answer, and a lot of you probably heard this before, is not at this time. That's okay, because I, as the EHS person, I'm still pursuing environmental management. I'm trying to not only find ways to ensure that nothing is released, fingers crossed, but also maybe we can find less hazardous materials to run the operation. So I'm working with the engineers. Maybe we could store less of it on site. One thing that they gave to me because of these questions that I brought up is there ways we could save on electricity? Yeah, there probably is. There's probably ways in which I could study some of these things and come up with solutions. There's so much we can do, and I think for a lot of us, we already have a lot of stuff going on. How do we fit this stuff in? And it's like the answer to the riddle: how do you eat an elephant? And it's one bite at a time. You do a little bit here, a little bit there, and that stuff adds up over time. It's just you have to make sure that you are setting yourself up for success by having time to review. If it's one of those things that I'll get to it when I get to it, you'll never get to it. You either plan to succeed or you succeed to wait. No, that's not the right term. You plan never. I'm not going to say it anyway, but essentially, I think we can all think about how we're already doing things. And sometimes when a new initiative comes along and we understand it from a different perspective, it helps us develop better metrics, or just collect something a little differently, analyze something a little differently, and we find that other people next to us are doing kind of the same thing. So then we combine it, and then it's less work for both of us because we're both doing it. And so I think there is, and I hate the term synergy, but there's synergy involved in pursuing something like this, but you have to begin the discussion.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So what we're hearing in the chat is some are having their top leadership driving these initiatives, which is generally where we're hearing it starting, though we also have someone who's saying that no, their leadership is like, why would we do anything different? We've been doing it this way for 30 years. Yep, that's common. It looks like some people have different teams that are working on different pieces, which is what we heard in San Antonio as well. Like an HR group of leaders is leading a particular element of ESG. EHS is leading a different type of element, and they're bringing things together. And we'll talk about collaborators here in a minute. But to Todd's point of like, where do we start? What do we do? Start with what you're already doing. Many of you mentioned you have environmental responsibilities. Guess what? I bet you're already collecting data on that. Christy, you can move to the next slide. So looking at what you're already doing. And then how are you collecting data on that, and how can that data be shared, and how can you benchmark that data? And then looking at, okay, so these are the things we're already doing. How can we manage those risks better? Is there an improvement that we can make that we'd want to set a goal by, this time next year, or in 5 years, or in 3 years, or in next quarter? How could we maybe make an improvement on this thing that we're already doing? So not inventing a new way to do things, but looking at what are we already doing? Where do they fit into those categories? How might we do something better? How can we benchmark against ourselves now, set some goals for the future? And then with ESG, it's being transparent, which is why we see all these landing pages that people are saying, hey, this is what we're doing. This is how we're going to try to do better. And these are the goals that we're shooting for, and we're going to share that. And we're going to share that with our investors. We're going to share it with our employees. We're going to share it with our communities. And that's a place to start. Before we move on, Todd, I saw you smiling. Is there something that you wanted to share?
No, I'm just reading off of the off the discussion board. And it just, people are doing a great job. They're sharing a lot of stuff. But just to keep going with what you had said, I think I had brought up before, you know, if you've ever been through an accreditation study,
Yeah.
if you've ever pursued like a designation or something, that you have, I mean, in order to be successful, what you do is you start trying things. And I know that's scary for some people, that, well, I want to know exactly what to do before I start. Take it from an old guy like me. Nah, you kind of learn from making mistakes. Socrates was right. And that, you know, we try stuff, but what you do is you're documenting how you're going about it and what you expect as an outcome. Did you reach that outcome? Well, then maybe your assumptions were correct, and continue building from it. If you didn't get what you expected, well, what didn't you know? What didn't you understand? What obstacles occurred?
Mhm.
Try to tweak that and take another
Mhm.
step. So this is an iterative process. And I think someone had brought up the ISO 26,000 standard. Yeah, ISO sets up standards all predicated on the basic idea of quality management. Quality management is a continuous improvement methodology. That's what this is. You know, that we're going to try stuff now and see what we can do. You know, if from an environmental perspective, we can get rid of some of our, you know, more hazardous materials or reduce the amount we have on site, that's success. If we
Mhm.
can find that we can recycle certain things.
Mhm.
I'm looking right now at finding a way to better capture this lubricant oil that can be recycled. So if we can reduce the quantity we have on site, we can get rid of one of our permits, and it's going
Mhm.
to clean things up too.
Mhm.
It's just, you know,
Mhm.
sometimes we look at problems, we try to throw a solution at it. But I think sometimes when we have problems, what it is, it's an opportunity to actually, you know, step back, understand it, and make not only it better, but other things better. And I feel like that's what ESG is versus just environmental, just safety. That's
Mhm.
me.
Mhm. Yeah. So I'm looking at the time. Todd, we have our next three slides. We're breaking down, under environmental. What are you doing today? So Todd, do you want to take this one and key into the items that we've been talking about?
Yeah. So, you know, spill containment, all these things, I'm dealing with these things right now. Actually, I'm putting together the program. And it's interesting that on its own, it may not be an issue. But then when you start looking at what the requirements are from the EPA, and then wherever your state level things are, and I saw we said somebody works for Minnesota PCA. I have to work with the Wisconsin DNR. That, you know, what are we trying to do to, you know, if we have things that can spill and we're containing them, can we reduce their quantities? I had just said that. With stormwater protection, you know,
Mhm.
one thing we can do is once a month make sure that we're not clogging up the lines that are going to the city or municipal sewers. And after a rain event that's coming off of our uh, parkways. What am I thinking of? Parking lots. You know, is there a sheen in the water? Should we be doing something to try and mitigate if something leaks from a vehicle? For RCRA, which I love because it's cradle to grave, it's, you know, the things we have, are we tracking them from the delivery point to when we get them removed? Because you save money when you're not disposing as much, and you're saving money if you're not spilling any of it. And I could keep going down the line, but you know, my internships when I was an undergrad were in recycling and trying to find ways to reduce the, you know, what would be considered, we were using hazardous materials to non-hazardous materials, water-based things. And I
Mhm.
learned a lot way back in the early 90s about this stuff. It's things you can do. And also, to be honest, I mean, I love learning, and going to a conference that I'm not really familiar with and learn about new technologies that recover and recycle, that are less hazardous. These are all
Mhm.
really good things.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
if your company committing to ESG, you know, allows you to go pursue, you know, expanding your knowledge, expanding your value to the company, man, that's a feather in your cap. I say go for
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's good. So Todd, you're talking about again, looking at environmental, and so many people who are with us today are saying, I have responsibilities in environmental. It's looking at what are we already doing? How can we make some improvements? How can we gather data on what we're doing right now? How can we set some goals to do things a little bit better? Before we move into social, which is coming up next, Christy, if you want to move there, I just wanted to address, Nicole has a question about how would this look in a government agency when the stakeholders are taxpayers, right? So Nicole, depending on the agency, well, I guess it probably depends on your state. So when you think about in corporate America, often the people that are setting the agenda for, we want to do something with sustainability, we want to do something with ESG, that usually comes from the leadership at the top. So in a state government system, you'd want to look to the governor's office first and find out, like, has there been an initiative set for something, and have they put together some kind of framework that you need to work within? Or are you, as an agency, doing it on your own? And so then is the head of that agency, did they put something together that you can start fitting in the pieces to the puzzle? That then you'd be able to share with taxpayers, obviously, usually in landing pages and disclosure statements. So the S. So looking at the S, many of you have responsibilities in the E, the environmental piece. Many more of us have a lot of responsibilities in that S piece, the social piece. So that would be looking at things that you're already doing. Many of you said you have safety and health responsibilities, compliance responsibilities. So how are you tracking your data for training? How are you tracking things for all of your compliance programs that you have to have in place, and how you're sharing those with people? How are you tracking data on the hazard mitigations that you're doing? What about tracking how you're working with joint safety and joint labor and safety committees in your committees? How are you tracking what you're doing with those committees and sharing those sort of things? And then many of you are also doing things with safety and health at home. So what are you doing now? How can you track? How can you compile your data on what you're doing? Do some benchmarking with it, share it where it's appropriate and how it's appropriate and what you want to do. So that's really what this is about. Oh, Keith is asking, would you agree that a safety element of social aligns with NIOSH total worker health? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely it does. Yeah, you muted yourself, Todd. If you want to move, governance. Thanks, Christy. Appreciate it. Christy's driving the slides for us, if you wonder who I'm talking about, our helpful colleague on the other side. So governance, EHS professionals might not have a lot of influence over governance. So some of those things may have to do with business ethics, executive pay, corruption, board diversity, those kind of things. You may have a seat at some of those tables. We all, of course, in our positions have responsibility over business ethics and the way that we comport ourselves, just as individuals, but also with those that we influence as well. And how can we be influential in making more space for underrepresentation in the places that we work as well. So again, this is applying that same sort of formula. What are we already doing? What are our risks in those areas that we need to be thinking about that we may prioritize? How can we gather data on them? How can we do things a little bit better? How can we set some goals if there's some goals to be set? And then what do we want to be transparent about? And so that would be if there's a formula, that's what we're suggesting right now. Yeah, Todd, your turn.
Yep. And I just replied to Valerie. I think she had a
Yeah.
really good point that some places they only, the focus is, or like, even if you're at a company and the company that management's like, just make us compliant. Okay. So, but there are ways, and I think this is the perfect, thank you for the transition, Valerie, that we have to convince management of things. And I think that's the biggest question that I get from a lot of people when I speak at conferences is, well, how do I convince management to invest in safety? How do I convince management to adopt, corporate level goals on environmental management? And it comes down to showing them how it makes them look better, how it makes their jobs easier. And it's not easy. And we've got the sign up there. For years, over a decade now, I've kind of rejected the concept of safety culture and stop throwing things at me because I feel the connotation is that something has to be perfect in order to have it. And when things have to be perfect, then people aren't engaging when something goes wrong. They're trying to hide the negatives. And I think what we need is a learning culture. And of course, oh, he's a professor. Of course, he wants a learning culture. Like I have a hammer, everything's a nail. But it's true. The thing that motivates me to go above and beyond the minimum is learning. I love to learn things, and having a learning culture is things are going to go wrong. Things are not going to work as expected. Instead of attempting to assign blame and therefore punish, let's try to learn from those issues, which is exactly what I talked about before. These are opportunities for improvement. So how are we going to convince the C-suite? I don't like that term. How are we going to convince? Let's start with just convincing our manager that this would be a good thing to do. Make it part of that makes them look good when we accomplish something, that the company looks better. And sometimes it takes informal discussions. I mean, I don't know if anybody here has really taken any classes on persuasion. There are different ways in which to get someone to agree with you, or at least respect what you're trying to say. And yeah, if anybody is in like business, has taken sales classes, and I don't mean to go off on tangents or whatever, but
Yes, Professor Lushine.
but it's basically it's planting seed ideas, and I do that all the time in a lot of different ways, formally, informally, to try to get the message across. This isn't this is gonna dominate the day. If they say no, I'm gonna walk away. It's okay, you're not ready yet. And that's just the way some people are. Go ahead, Jill.
Yeah. So, someone early on today asked about whether this was an HR thing or an EHS thing. Good question. So, Verdantix did a global survey in 2022 asking the question, like, who's supporting the EHS function for your strategy in your company, and what's it going to look like in the next 2 years? And so they surveyed 300 corporate EHS leaders and executives across 31 countries and 25 industries. So what you're seeing on the screen are the results of that survey. So 44% of EHS professionals said that they're going to own it. And I don't know if any of you own it yet, but 44% are saying that they're going to own it or have a key decision maker, or only 3% said they didn't have any influence, which leads us to wonder, like, oh my gosh, if I end up being the person who owns it, do I have to do all of this on my own? You can go to the next slide, Christy. And the answer to that is no, there's no way. When you look at all of those buckets, you don't have responsibility in all of those areas. This is where you might own the overall piece to say, like, we've got to work on this, but you're going to have all these key contributors because you don't own all of this data. You don't have responsibility over all of these things. When we think about corporate risk, like I was talking about earlier, that corporate risk falls into a lot of the titles that you see on the screen right now. So the people that might make up a team of individuals who are working on benchmarking, collecting data, and sharing it may be your IT professionals, your logistics people, your finance people, your maintenance managers, your operations. So it's not just you. It's not just you. But 44% in this survey say, I'm going to maybe be owning the whole thing. And you're going to want to pull together key contributors for that. Before we move into our live Q&A, Todd, in our key takeaways here, is there anything that you wanted to address on this particular one, or our key takeaways here at the end?
Let's go to key takeaways. We're getting near that point in the day. So just a real quick. So, I've been spending a lot of time kind of watching what people are saying here. And there are some who came in with the belief that ESG is just punishing us. It's going to destroy the company. We've had others are like, man, I can't even see this moving an inch, in my corporate. Others are like, this is so awesome. I think, what's the key takeaway here? One is, at this point in time, it's still out there in the ether being fought from both sides. Fine, whatever. But let's ignore the noise. Let's consider it from the perspective of, can we improve the safety, health, and the environmental management of our company by considering things greater than what's right in front of us, and including others within our organization, and searching for answers outside of what is our normal domain.
Mhm.
For me, that answer is yes. And I think that that pursuit puts us in a better position. Should this become more formalized out there, and say management's like one day is like, hey, what are you doing today? Oh, you're busy? No, okay, we want you to pursue ESG. Say, okay, great. Where's my team? But I do think that pursuing some of the things we had kind of covered today, that some of the resources that are out there will make the things you're doing today better,
Yeah.
in
I
short.
think, yeah, before we turn over to Q&A, and thank you all for sticking with us, if you end up being in that 44% that gets tasked with leading ESG in your organization, I'd look at it and go, yay, hooray. You know why? Because you're going to have a direct line of communication. The thing that every time we pick up a publication, every time we go to a conference, it's like, how do I get leadership buy-in? How do I get leadership buy-in? Well, if you're leading a cross-disciplinary team to address these issues that impact the corporate risk, the entire corporate risk, and you're the person that's at the tip of the spear, you've now got access, you've got influence. So if someone is asking you in your organization, hey, we want you to, or do you want to lead ESG in our organization or our sustainability efforts? I'd say, yeah. Because it's gonna keep you moving further in the organization to continue being able to provide a world-class place for your employees to show up every day and to be in your communities. With that, Barry, you turn it over to Q&A.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Jill and Todd, for sharing your insights with us. Before we start the Q&A, we want to remind everyone of the evaluation survey that we're asking you to complete today. The survey will open in a different screen after this webinar. Your input is important to us because it does help us to improve our future webcasts. Now, let's get to some of those questions. And we did have a question come in from Dominic. And Todd, I'm going to direct this at you first. He says, it seems like we practice a lot of this daily. So is there a need to develop an ESG policy and procedure?
Well, yeah, because we want standardization across all agency, across all industries. And so it's going to look different depending on what industry, actually, even what state you're operating in. This stuff is going to look different. And so to have a generalized standardization, which I go to, then if they come up with a more objective rating system, then it would be more accurate than it is now. So yeah, I think there at some point more guidance is needed. And I think we had pointed out before that there is an ISO 26,000 out there that I think is a really good start. It's a good starting point.
Great. Jill, anything to add to that?
Todd's got it.
Okay. So Jill, I'm going to come to you with the next
Yeah.
question. This is from Abigail, who
Mhm.
asks, are there goals to achieve for this program, such as a certification or recognition for implementing ESG into the safety industry?
Yeah. I'm not familiar with any. I mean, Todd, you just mentioned ISO, but in terms of something that is an individual that we can pursue professionally, Todd, have you read about anything? I have not.
Let me do a Google search quick.
Oh man. Okay.
Well, with that, I'll get started on the next
Yeah.
question. So, Jill, I
Yeah.
was curious. Are there specific industries that are leading the way with ESG implementation? Because everyone's always looking for case studies and examples of other folks out there that are implementing this. Are there industries leading the way?
Yeah, that was one of the questions that was discussed when we were in San Antonio as well, Todd. If you remember, people were asking us if there's industries that are particular leaders in this regard. And I don't know that there's a particular industry that came to the top. People had mentioned earlier this is all just about investors and and profits and investments. And obviously, when you start searching ESG, the first thing you're going to come up with is about investments for our personal portfolios and our corporate portfolios, but that's not what we're talking about here today. If I were to hazard a guess, I would look to our European partners more than within, there's industries, things that have big environmental impact, but if you're looking for like who's doing things really well on this, and if you happen to be a global organization, I would look at what people are doing in Europe in particular, and what things are they following. Since
Great,
we don't
thank you
have
for
any
that.
laws, we don't have any laws here yet, unless
Right.
you do on a municipal or a state level. Yeah.
Great. Thank you for that.
And
Um,
real quick, my quick search.
sure.
Yeah.
Some of the companies that had really high ratings for the ESG tended to be the organizations that are attracting millennials more. So like your Metas, your
I think,
Googles,
and
things
you
like
probably
that.
mean Gen Z, because we're
Gen Z, yeah, I'm
yeah,
sorry, yeah,
yeah.
I don't understand generations very well. I'm old.
Well,
Yeah.
the next question we had today, Todd, I'm going to ask you. Um, ESG seems like something that bigger organizations with more
Mm,
resources might be able to focus on.
mm.
So, how can smaller organizations with fewer resources best focus their efforts?
On those elements, that one slide that Jill talked about with the elements of things, we start there. We start small. And like I said, I'm helping out a smaller company right now, and I proposed it to them. They're like, not at this time. But what am I doing? I'm starting to check the other boxes, to make sure minimum we're at compliance. And then what can we do to recycle better, reduce waste better, to find more sustainable safety mitigation strategies versus the just throw PPE at them there. And then
Mhm.
I mean, here's what I'll tell that person too. My effort to do these little things and to reach out and try to collaborate with other engineers and operations, process engineers, the technical maintenance people, it's shown benefits. They're coming to me and talking to me about things that involve their work. So now they're integrating safety and environmental concepts into their daily thing. That's where it starts. I know we think that it starts way at the top, but there are everyday things that we can do. I really do think that collaborating with other people within the work environment. I had a student I was walking through today. I said, one of the key things you can do earlier in your job, learn people's names, because people are coming up and we had pleasantries. That's the beginning. We're building trust first.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
then we start sharing. Sorry, I'd go off if you
yeah.
don't shut me up.
So I want to make sure that we talked about small businesses, and so if you're a small business and you're attending right now today, should you be working on this? I would say yes, you absolutely could, because you should rather, if you're a supplier to a larger organization, that larger organization is going to be asking you, what are you doing for sustainability? What are you doing for ESG? And they might ask you to provide data to them. Because, these larger organizations, if you're a supplier to them, they want to make sure that they're in alignment with an organization that's not going to make their brand look bad, right? And so if you're a small organization, if you haven't already been asked by someone you're supplying to, you will be soon.
Great. Thank you for that. Todd, I know you mentioned this isn't a checking the box presentation, but could you speak to having an ESG discussion and maybe who should be at the table and who should not be at the table?
It
Oh,
really go ahead,
yeah.
Jill.
Well, I was just going to say we have a slide covering that, so maybe we could share
Sure.
some of those job titles. Christy's sharing it right now.
Excellent.
Those are some for sure. Yeah.
Great. The next question I have for you all, and Jill, I'll send this your way. Someone asks, my company really hasn't addressed this yet, but I feel it's coming. Is
Mm.
there any way I can be ready or start getting prepared for this?
Yeah, right. So it goes back to what we were saying earlier, really looking at the things that you own today, the things that you're already doing. And, if you are maybe light on data on something, I'd start by looking at how can I provide data on this particular thing. Like let's say it's hazard mitigation. And let's say currently the method that you're using for hazard mitigation is on a clipboard or a piece of paper or a spreadsheet or whatever. Is there a way that you can really hone in on how am I collecting data to prove what I'm doing to abate hazards, correct hazards all along? You can break that down a million different ways on the things that you already have responsibility for, and then maybe start setting some goals on those. So if you get tapped on the shoulder to say, hey, we're working on this, what can you give me? You're like, oh, look at all this stuff that I already have and that I'm doing. And those are all things that are just going to help you professionally anyway. Yeah.
Great. It looks like we have time for one more question today
Mhm.
with our speakers. I wanted to throw this out from Dominic, who mentions in the chat, I'm currently going to need to develop this program for our company. Are there any good places to look
Mhm.
for a template to get started?
I, as Todd is probably Googling it right now, I would say those landing pages we invited you to look at earlier, look at what people are capturing, maybe for similar industries as yourselves, as what you've got right now, and say, hey, maybe this would work for our company in our type of industry, and go to any industry groups that you're part of and ask, like, is my industry group working on this? As was the case that I gave the example with the semiconductor industry earlier. Todd, anything to add with that?
No, that's exactly the answer I gave him in the
Oh,
chat.
I
But
didn't
no,
even
no,
see
no.
that.
But here's the thing too. We
Share
talk about
brain.
who
Okay.
to bring to the table, and I think it might have been Valerie who said we should be bragging about no matter what we're doing. So what
Yeah.
what what person in the organization is responsible for that? Marketing. So talk to marketing too. If your competitor has an ESG program and they're showing the benefits of it and you aren't,
Yeah.
it sure, that may not result in any less sales. That may not result from other things, but it should put like a little thing in your stomach or your gut that maybe we got to start thinking about this.
Attract and retain employees as
Yes,
well.
exactly. Right.
Oh,
Yeah.
and you all keep sharing things with everyone. This is so great. Thank you
That's
so
awesome.
much.
Yeah, thank you everyone for
Yeah.
the great comments today. Unfortunately, we've run out of time today. Thank you so much to our awesome presenters, Jill James, Dr. Todd Lusheen, the entire team from our sponsor at HSI, and of course, all of you who joined us today. Take care, everyone, and have a safe day.